Good morning, everybody. Okay, so what we got is a lot of requests to teach you guys how to cook things a little bit more healthily, to remove the fat, to remove the cream, to remove all those things that we may have issues with, so we can take all of our everyday favorites and make them into something a little bit healthier that you don't have to feel so guilty about eating. All right, we're gonna get our marinade in. Now, according to our recipe, it calls for dry thyme, it calls for salt, it calls for oil, and it calls for granulated garlic. So for those of us who don't know, granulated garlic is just the dry spice version of garlic. We can find that a lot in any grocery store. Any grocery store you go to, you'll find the dry granulated garlic. It's easier to use, and we don't have to worry about a shelf life necessarily with it. All right, so right here, we have a little bit of our olive oil. So there's differences between our different oils, right? So our olive oil is gonna have a different flavor than our corn oil, is gonna have a different flavor than our vegetable oil. All of these are different, and which one should we use for which one? It depends completely on personal preference. It's all up to you guys. We're using simple olive oil because this one is gonna have a much higher smoking point, so it's more forgiving for us. It's not going to burn so easily once we put it inside of our pan. We're gonna add just a drizzle of oil. We don't wanna go overboard with this, just a little bit, just enough to coat the chicken itself. All right, I'm gonna have Lester mix this up for me to make sure that all of my spices and all of my seasonings are all the way around the chicken. So every single bite's gonna have every ingredient, every bit of flavor that we want it to have. And then Lester's gonna walk around and show everybody what it looks like so that you guys can see that everything is evenly coated. This is really important if we want every single bite to taste exactly the same. Okay, so we have to kind of be careful with these buzzwords like healthy or organic or anything like that. Just because it says, oh, super healthy, super organic, no trans fats, all that stuff on the label. It's more of here's how I want to describe it. We're going to have fats that are going to be worse for us and fats that are going to be better for us. With any of those fats, we want to find the best ones for us, so like an avocado oil or an extra virgin olive oil, any of those oils, those first press, really, really good for you. They're really high in the good fat as opposed to the bad fat. But just like with anything, if we want to do our best, we want to watch our portions. So instead of eating an entire cheesecake, just have a slice. It's just this, it's the same thing with oil. It's the same thing with everything. We got to watch our portion size the most. So make our healthy choices, but watch our portion size. That's the most important. Okay, so now we have our pan heating up. We have our saute pan heating up. According to our recipe, we want it we don't want it to be super, super hot. We don't want it to be smoking, because the problem with that is we'll burn the outside of our product before the inside is even anywhere near cooked. So what we're gonna do is we're going to add a very small amount of oil to the bottom of our pan. Again, just enough to coat the very bottom of the pan. We want to use as little as we can. Oil does have a lot of fat in it. We wanna shrink that down as much as possible. So now we're gonna get our chicken inside of the pan. Okay, so what we're looking for on our chicken is we want a nice, beautiful golden brown to appear on the edges of our chicken. And don't worry, we're gonna walk around and show everybody exactly what we're talking about. And it's gonna take just a second so you guys get to smell all of the wonderful smells and hear all of the wonderful sounds. So when we add anything to our pan, if we have our pan on a medium heat, as soon as we add our chicken, our pork, our fish, our shrimp, whatever we add to it, what happens to our pan? It gets cold because we're adding something cold to it. So our pan was a nice medium temperature. As soon as I added my chicken in there, it drops the temperature down. So I turn my heat up to compensate for it. We just want to make sure we're looking at it to make sure it's not smoking, it's not too hot, it's not burning anything. We just have to make sure we keep our eyes on it. We want to add our oil toward the very end, just before we put the chicken inside, maybe 1 minute. 1 minute before we add our actual protein to it. We don't want to overheat our oil because then it has properties that are bad for us. Okay, so as you guys can see, it is still raw on the top, but we have that nice brown line underneath it, and that's what's going to tell us it's time to turn our chicken. Once that brown line on the very edge starts creeping up, that's how we know, oh hey, it's time to flip our chicken. Okay, we're going to cook our chicken on the other side as well. So one way is we're going to follow our recipe, and that is to sear it on both sides, and then we can finish it inside of the oven. The other way that we can do this, if you happen to want to make a soup during the summer and you don't want to turn your oven on and warm up your entire house, what we can do is we can sear our chicken on both sides where it's still raw in the middle. And then once it's finished searing on both sides, we simply set it off to the side, even though it is still raw, And then what we'll do is we'll add our seared but raw chicken back to our soup once we get our liquid simmering, and that's going to continue to cook our chicken all the way through. Again, completely up to you. Okay, so once we're finished, if we're just searing our chicken on both sides, this is what our chicken's gonna look like once we're finished. Nice golden brown. So what we're gonna do is we're going to allow our chicken to sit and to rest. We'll come back, we'll cut it up, and we'll add it to our soup at the very end so it'll be fully cooked. Okay, now we're going to get to our other side, the actual broth. So for our broth, we have the most beautiful cut vegetables you've ever seen in your whole life because Ronaldo is so fantastic at his knife skills. So what we're gonna do is we're going to take our pot. And everybody has one of these at home, I know you do. So here's what we're gonna do. Following our recipe, we're going to heat our medium-sized pot over medium heat. We don't want it to be too hot. If we'll look at step number 2, add oil and sweat vegetables until translucent. So here's what that means. Here's what sweat means. We want to be able to cook our vegetables without adding any color to them. So if our heat is too high, we're gonna end up caramelizing or burning any of our vegetables. So we wanna do a medium heat. So I have a question. This one is not on any list, it's not on anything. How do we know when our pan is hot enough? Water, brilliant, yes. So a really good way to know if our pan is hot enough, just put a little bit of water inside. Okay, so we have just another minute until our pan heats up enough that we can actually add our vegetables to it. In the meantime, is there anybody here who is doing the keto diet? So here's what we could do if we wanted to do something keto. Instead of doing our carrots, we'd have to remove the carrots completely because of course they have too much sugar. And then our pasta. So instead of cooking our pasta, what we could do instead is do a keto option. So we could do fathead noodles, which you can purchase from any of those big brand name retailers. The other thing that we could do is instead of doing pasta, we could substitute hearts of palm. And hearts of palm have a very similar texture to noodles, and they are wonderful. So if you go to the store next time, instead of buying your box of pasta, buy a jar or buy a can of hearts of palm and use that instead of your pasta. It's fantastic. Okay, our pan is hot enough, but let's make sure first. Okay, is anybody gonna do the sound effects with me or am I gonna be by myself? Very important. Okay, awesome. So now we're going to add our veggies inside and a little bit of oil. Once again, we want to use the smallest amount of oil possible because this is our healthy cooking demo. So we don't want to do a whole bunch of oil, a whole bunch of fat, a whole bunch of cholesterol. All right, so we're gonna start with our carrots, our celery, and our onions. Now again, we want to have it on medium heat, and we're going to stir it frequently to make sure we get no color on the vegetables. Another really important step is to season everything as we go. So that way at the end we're like tasting it, oh no, there's no salt, there's no pepper, there's no garlic. We want to season all of our food as we cook it. That way by the time we get to the end, everything is wonderful and has a ton of flavor. Okay, that said, we do, however, want to go really, really easy on our salt until the very, very end, because we don't want to add a whole bunch of salt to this and a whole bunch of salt to that and a whole bunch of salt to this. And then by the time we go to taste it, it's super, super salty. So don't be afraid to add your seasonings, but go easy on the salt until the very end. So we're going to add a little bit of black pepper, just a pinch. And again, just a pinch of salt. The purpose of sweating our vegetables as opposed to caramelizing, as opposed to getting any of that, the dark on our vegetables. The reason that we sweat our vegetables is because it allows them to release a lot more flavor and a lot brighter flavor than they would if we were adding color to them. Let's talk about the different things that we could also add to this soup. What's fantastic is this recipe only has a couple of ingredients. So if we want to keep it basic, we absolutely can. But if we want to get fancy, there's so many different ways that we could upgrade it to make it better. For me, when I'm sick, when I have a cold, I want a really, really spicy soup to clean everything out and you feel better in 2 days. So what we could is we could add jalapenos to it, or we could add Scotch bonnets or habaneros or whatever makes you happy. We could also add some of the vegetables that we have inside of our basket as well. So we could add cauliflower, we could add broccoli, we could add bell pepper, we could add whatever vegetables you like. Whatever makes you happy. Coming along, and I wanna walk this around to show you guys what I mean by sweating and by translucent. Our onions will never be completely clear, but we mean translucent. You guys can see that our onions are starting to lose their color. So that way we know that we've sweated them correctly. When the onions start to become a little bit see-through, when we can see through them just a little bit. So now, what we can do from here, we have two options. So we can cook our pasta, our rice, our orzo, whatever grain we want to add to our chicken noodle soup. It doesn't just have to be pasta. We can cook that in a separate pot and then add it back at the very end. Or if we just want to clean one pot at the end of the night, what we can do is add our pasta to our vegetables. They're gonna start cooking with our vegetables, and that way we only have to clean one pot at the end of the day. So the pasta that we've chosen for this is orzo. So it looks like tiny rice. The reason that we chose such a tiny pasta, because it's tiny, 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 is because it's gonna cook a lot faster. So we just brought out a bunch of different types of pasta to show you guys the different options that we can have. And this isn't even half of them. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of pasta. And if we don't want to do pasta, we could do potatoes, we could do leeks, we could do the hearts of palm, we could do couscous, we could do farfalle, we could do bulgur wheat, we could do anything that we wanted inside of here. It doesn't just have to be pasta, but again, this is a good jumping off point. We can do like the fathead keto noodles, we could add egg noodles. If we're going to add our egg noodles, I would suggest we add those at the very end, only because egg noodles cook so fast. So add those at the very, very end. One of the benefits of us adding the pasta right now is that all of the juices that our onions, that our celery, that our carrots have secreted, I suppose, is absorbed by that pasta. So now our pasta is gonna have the flavor from our celery, from our onions, from our carrots, all that good stuff. So now we're gonna add our chicken stock, or if we wanted to do something different, we could add vegetable stock, we could add beef stock, we could do whichever stock that we prefer. It just depends on your personal preferences. How many of us have 6 hours at home to make stock? 6 hours at home? I love it. Okay, for everybody else who does not have 6 hours to watch the stock at home, we buy the store-bought stock, right? One thing I want you guys to remember, when we're looking at our store-bought stocks, if you turn it over, if our first ingredient is salt, don't buy it. With all of our foods, it's how the ingredients are listed on the back of our product. The first ingredient is what's in there the most. So if the first ingredient is salt, then most of what's in there is gonna be salt. So now we're going to bring our liquid up to a simmer. So it's gonna take just a minute for it to come back up to a simmer, but that's good because it gives us a second. What is the difference, does anybody know, between a simmer and a boil? Our simmer is gonna have bubbles, our boil is going to have bubbles. So the way that we tell them apart, when we're simmering, it's gonna be at a lower temperature and our bubbles are going to pop before they come to the surface of the liquid. So here is why that's important, not just a fun fact. If we're cooking our pasta, we have to remember our vegetables are in there too. If we don't want to end up with a soup where our vegetables are all soggy and sad, we want it to be a simmer, not a boil. If it's a boil, it's going to boil our pasta, which is awesome, but it's also going to overcook our vegetables. So while this is coming back up to a simmer, let's talk about our chicken. So we're going to assume that our chicken over here is still raw in the middle. But just from me searing it off on one side and then searing it off on the other side, it's fully cooked. So we don't have to stress out about, oh, is it 165? Is it fully cooked? Is it all the way done? Is that exactly how I want it done? So if we just seared our chicken and we get a good sear on one side and then a good sear on the other side, we have that flavor locked in. So if this was our raw chicken, all we'd have to do is once our pasta's finished cooking, we add our chicken back in and then adjust our seasonings to taste. So this is going to take forever because a watched pot never boils. That is absolutely true. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend, yay, we pretended, yay, it's boiling. Okay, so we're going to pretend that our soup has come to a simmer. Now that our soup has come to a simmer, all of our pasta inside has been cooked all the way through. We've tasted our pasta, we've made sure it's not crispy, and then we've added our chicken back to it. Our last step is going to be to taste it and make sure that we don't need to make any adjustments. And we will always have to make adjustments. It's always gonna need a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, a little bit of garlic, or whatever it needs. That's a great question. So our question was, could we marinate the chicken overnight? We absolutely could. We'd get an even stronger and richer flavor from that. Also, if we wanted to change the marinade, we can do that very easily. We could add whatever other seasonings we wanted to it. Our recipe calls for thyme. But it doesn't necessarily have to be just thyme. We could do rosemary, we could do sage, we could do whatever herbs that you prefer. Like I said, this is an awesome recipe because it's very basic, it's very simple, which means that we can change it into many different things. Okay, with our soup, with our sauces, the best time to add fresh herbs is at the very, very end, just before service. With our dried herbs, we'd want to add them in the beginning when we're sweating or sauteing our vegetables. Who's hungry? Who's ready? So the beautiful assistants are gonna go bowl us up some soup.